We have campaigned as a pro-business party, and we will govern as a pro-business party. Thanks to Keir's leadership, we have changed the Labour Party to arrive at a moment when we can truthfully say that Labour is the natural party of British business. Unambiguously, unapologetically, a party of wealth creation. Well, thank you very much, and it's good to be here today. My message really is very simple. All the conversations that we've had over the last 3 years, all the commitments that I've made, all the plans that we have drawn up, with your fingerprints all over them, they weren't just something for opposition, forgotten upon entry to office. We meant them. I meant them. I'll try to spare you a political speech today, but I hope you'll forgive me just a few words about the election campaign. Because too frequently, the economic debate of the last few years has been conducted on the assumption that nothing can be done but argue over the distribution, over the dwindling proceeds of anemic growth, as if our vicious cycle of low growth and high taxes and deteriorating public services is somehow inevitable. By contrast, we hear far too little about the agency that governments have to change that basic equation. That frustrates me as much as I expect it frustrates many of you here. The Conservatives want to talk about Labour's imaginary tax rises to avoid a conversation about the real state of our economy. Low growth leading to higher taxes. That is their record. Fresh out of ideas for how to grow our economy, they've turned time and time again to the only lever that they have left, the tax lever. Now, the tax system does have a role to play in any plan for growth, which is why I have promised to cap corporation tax at its current rate for the duration of the next Parliament. But my worry is this. If we carry on having the same conversation over the next 4 years that we've had over the last 4 weeks, then we will fail to grip the causes of the problems that we face. Ultimately, there is only one sustainable way to get our public services on a strong footing and to make working people better off, and that is economic growth. The manifesto that we published last week is a manifesto for wealth creation. And I don't believe that you can tax and spend your way to higher growth. Growth will always rely on a successful private sector. I've worked in financial services, and I'm not one of those politicians who'll treat private enterprise as a dirty word or play culture war politics to the detriment of our most successful industries. Nor do I accept that there is a necessary trade-off between business success and making working people better off. We have campaigned as a pro-business party, and we will govern as a pro-business party. Thanks to Keir's leadership, we have changed the Labour Party to arrive at a moment when we can truthfully say that Labour is the natural party of British business. Unambiguously, unapologetically, a party of wealth creation. The defining economic mission of the next Labour government will be no small task: to achieve the fastest sustained growth in the G7, with good jobs and productivity growth in all parts of our country. These missions aren't just a campaigning device, nor are they meant to be easy, the sort of targets that governments can set themselves in the hope that whatever they do, they'll be met in the passage of time. If we win this election, these aren't going to just be Labour's missions. They're going to be national missions, demanding that we mobilise all our resources in a collective effort. That requires a new ethos of partnership, with business unshackled to do what it does best, generating wealth, and government offering the support that only it can. An approach fit for a world reshaped by pandemic, war, and the long fallout from the financial crisis. A world where trickle-down and trickle-out mantras of the past are no longer of any use. And it is no longer enough, if it ever was, for the state to simply get out of the way. Labour's alternative is what I call Securonomics, an economic approach grounded in the understanding that the foremost responsibilities of government today are to offer economic stability, productive partnership with business, and security for working people in a turbulent world. That requires three things. First, an end to the instability that deters investment and the taking of risks, which is fundamental to a successful market economy, leaving small and growing firms struggling to access the finance to scale up, while successful firms have all too often chosen to list abroad. I hear it all the time from business leaders. We want to invest, but how can we do so with the confidence that our plans won't be blown off course by political turbulence? I started my career as an economist at the Bank of England. I won't be playing games with our economic stability. Returning stability must begin with an end to the political chaos of recent years and rest on a fiscal framework that commands credibility, ironclad fiscal rules and strong economic institutions. Second, we must end the decades of underinvestment, which have made us the only G7 economy with investment below 20% of GDP. That requires partnership between government and business. That partnership was embodied in the work of Labour's Startup Review led by Lord Jim O'Neill, which provided a roadmap to make Britain the best place to start and to grow a business. In government, that partnership will be embodied in new institutions. A revived Industrial Strategy Council set on a statutory footing. A National Wealth Fund, providing catalytic public investment to crowd in tens of billions of pounds of private investment. And a British Infrastructure Council, bringing together investors leading and working with government, and we've already started that in shadow form. We cannot afford delay, which is why I was so pleased to announce that if Labour forms the next government, we will host a major global investment summit in our first 100 days to send a simple message. Britain is open to business. And third, reform. We will reform our politics so that regional leaders have the powers that they need to drive growth in the areas that they know best. We will forge a closer relationship with our European neighbours to ease the bureaucratic burdens on business. And we will reform our planning system, which ties countless projects up in red tape before shovels are even in the ground. Planning reform has become a byword for political timidity in the face of vested interests and a graveyard of economic ambition. That must end. So the mandate that we are seeking is a mandate to get Britain building again, a mandate for economic growth. Even in challenging economic times, I see potential wherever I go, in the businesses that I visit, including many of yours, the entrepreneurs that I meet, including many of you, and the young people in our universities pushing ahead with groundbreaking research. And I see the high barriers to success too. Let's work together to tear down those barriers, to make that mission a reality. So here is my pledge to you. Labour is open to business. And with Labour, Britain will be open to business once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much for being here. And a bit of housekeeping. I am going to try and get some questions in at the end, so don't be shy. Keep them very pointed and put me to shame when it comes to the questions. So we'll be taking those at the end. Rachel, thank you very much for being here. It's been nearly a week since the manifesto was out, and analysts and economists have been poring over your plans. And I just want to put a few verdicts out there that we've heard from the city. Blue Bay Asset Management, who hold a huge amount of UK gilts, have called your programme mildly stimulative. The investment bank Nomura have said that it's a very modest fiscal plan. And some economists of Deutsche Bank have put the numbers through the OBR's fiscal multiplier and said that the ultimate net growth impact of your plans is 0.15 percentage points of GDP by the end of the Parliament. So this doesn't sound too much like a programme for change or indeed growth. What do you make of the numbers?
Well, it goes back to the point I was making earlier, that we're sort of trapped in this discussion about tax and spend, that anything that's worth doing has got to have a price tag attached to it. I just reject that entirely. That's why the focus of why I set out today was how we are seeking a mandate to grow the economy. And so much of that is about reform. You know, reforming our planning system, tearing up the bureaucracy that is involved in that, isn't about government spending more money. It's not about fiscal multipliers. It's about removing the barriers that make it hard for businesses to invest in Britain today. And that is what I'm determined to do. Reform of the planning system, of the pension system, making it easier to trade with our counterparts around the world, devolving more power to our mayors who know best what is right for the places that they represent, and reforming our skills system to make it easier for businesses to train up the next generation of working people. And those things are not about getting the checkbook out, because I think we all know the fiscal inheritance that an incoming government, whichever party forms the next government, is going to be really tough. You know, debt as a share of GDP almost 100%. The tax burden at a 70-year high. We can't just tax more to spend more. That's not going to work. We can't borrow more to spend more. So reform is absolutely essential, and that is why our manifesto really focused on growth and the reform we need to unlock business investment.
So on growth, let's give us some numbers. So 0.1%, 0.5% of GDP is very modest. Kwasi Kwarteng used to speak about getting the UK's growth potential back to 2 to 3%. That didn't end too well for him, but it was perhaps a noble aim. How much growth is sufficient for you to achieve the productivity gains, the general prosperity enhancements that you think this country deserves and should be heading towards?
Well, last time Labour were in office, the economy grew on average by around 2% a year. It's been around 1.4% in the 14 years of Conservative government. I don't see any reason why we can't achieve the growth rates that were achieved just a few years ago. And indeed, I want to get us back, you know, in the top half of the OECD league table. I want us to have the highest sustained growth in the G7. If over the last 14 years we had grown at just the average rate of other OECD economies, our economy today would be £150 billion bigger than it actually is. That would be worth £5,000 to every household in Britain, and would mean that we had £55 billion additional tax receipts to spend either on public services or to reduce the tax burden. That's how important growth is. And that's not, you know, growth that's out of this world. That's just having the average growth of other OECD economies. So I want to get us back on track with strong and sustained growth that, in the end, is the only way to both improve living standards and have the money that's needed for public services.
Sure. You mentioned other OECD economies, one of whom may have a change of government a couple of days after Labour comes into office, which is on July 7th in France, where a prospective far-right or hard-right nationalist party is telling its voters that it can't really make any fiscal promises because it doesn't know how bad the books are. You will also have to deliver an autumn statement. Are you also planning to give us the same message, that you don't know how bad the books are, and if the books are really bad, you might have to change course?
Well, I think I've been really clear that I know that the inheritance is going to be really tough, and that's why in our manifesto we have put forward only limited changes, very limited changes on tax and spend, some immediate injection of cash into our frontline public services, but all fully costed and fully funded. And I don't apologise for those being modest changes to taxes. We already have the highest tax burden in 70 years. I want taxes to come down, but I'm not going to make any promises without being able to say where the money's going to come from. But I think this point about the instability in the world at the moment is quite an important one, because over the last few years it's been Britain that has looked like the unstable, unsafe place to invest, lack of respect for the rule of law, 5 prime ministers, 7 chancellors in a short space of time. And I want Britain, and for investors to look at Britain and say, actually, Britain is a safe haven in a turbulent world, a place where I can invest in with confidence in a world where perhaps other countries are tilting to more populist politics. I want Britain to be seen by investors around the world as a safe place to put your money, a place that you can invest with confidence, knowing that government and business will work in partnership to really exploit the big opportunities we have as a country.
So this investment summit that you've mentioned within the first 100 days, is that going to be about telling multinationals that they should avoid spendthrift populist Europe and come to Britain instead?
Well, I want to bang the drum for Britain and show all the great potential that we have as a country. One of the privileges of this job of Shadow Chancellor is I've had the opportunity to go and visit countless businesses around the country, including during this election campaign. I see the potential everywhere we go with great entrepreneurs, fantastic businesses, world-leading university and innovation. And yet you're not seeing that in the GDP numbers or the productivity numbers. Investment, the lowest in the G7, the only G7 economy where investment is less than 20% of GDP. And I know from talking to businesses and investors what's holding back investment. And that's why those commitments to reform the planning system, the pension system, our skills system, to build easier trading relationships with countries around the world, that is what I want to do to unlock some of those opportunities.
Some of the neighbouring countries, you mentioned some of which you admire, particularly the US, they're also refashioning the role of the state in the economy, but they're not just offering political stability, they're actually offering businesses subsidies, implicit or explicit. We have to operate in an environment where there are lots of blandishments being offered to companies. Will you also eventually just have to pick some winners and give them money in the form of subsidies?
We're not America, and we don't have the fiscal firepower of America. And as I already said, our debt burden as a share of GDP and the tough fiscal rules that an incoming Labour government would operate under means that we don't have the ability to do some of those things. That's why so much of my focus is on reform rather than just splashing the cash. Now, look, we have committed to the creation of a national wealth fund. Mark Carney at the moment is leading a piece of work for us along with Amanda Blank and Venkat and Antonio at LNG, which is great, a National Wealth Fund task force looking at how we can use a National Wealth Fund to crowd in £3 of private investment for every £1 of public investment, and that task force will be reporting in July. That is our way of trying to stimulate and fast track some of the private sector investment that we want to see in industries like floating offshore wind, carbon capture and storage, green hydrogen, gigafactories for electric vehicles. I recognise and I make no apologies for it being at a smaller scale than what is happening in the US, but what we can offer alongside that is our fantastic industrial heritage, the great opportunities in Britain, and the reform to our planning system to make it quick and easier to get those grid connections, to get that infrastructure built. It's why we've said that we will very quickly update the national planning framework, provide a 10-year infrastructure plan, update the list of nationally significant infrastructure projects to make it easier for businesses to invest in some of these huge opportunities.
You've spoken about the strategic state, which is part of your Securonomics bid. How big is the strategic state? Is it smaller than the state we have now, or is it much larger?
Well, you see in the plans that we've set out, we're not talking about an expansion of the state. I think if you look at our public services, what is needed is reform of those public services, how we can use technology better in our schools and our hospitals to deliver a more personalised service, for example, how we can reform our skills system. The apprenticeship levy, I know, just doesn't work for so many businesses, big and small. How can we reform that? So young people have the opportunity to get the skills they need, older people have the chance to retrain, but crucially businesses are able to use the money they put into the apprenticeship levy to actually do what is needed to skill up their workforce and bring new people in.
You mentioned that this Labour Party is a party which is unambiguously in favour of wealth creation, but there are some parts of this manifesto that have caused a little bit of concern in the business community. I think perhaps the biggest is your package for workers' rights, which includes moving towards potentially banning zero-hours contracts or reducing work flexibility. What's the message to companies that might be a little bit afraid of the pressure that you're coming under from your trade union arm to make this package far more generous towards workers over employers?
I would say to businesses, you've got nothing to worry about from Labour's New Deal for working people and our plans to make work pay. If you look at the detail that we published, we will ensure that if you work for 12 weeks and you do regular hours, at the end of that period, that you have a right to a contract based on those hours. But if the employee wants to keep that flexibility of the zero-hour contracts, they are entitled to, and it won't stop employers being able to offer short-term contracts, for example, to meet holiday demand, Christmas demand, summer holidays demand, or to offer overtime. We're not going to prohibit those things. And in terms of rights from day one, we do want to expand the rights people have at work to give people greater security. We saw during the pandemic how insecure so many people's working lives were. But we would still have probation periods, because we know that when you take on new workers, then you are taking a risk, and you should be allowed to have a probation period. So there's nothing in Labour's New Deal for working people that businesses should worry about. In 1997, Labour made a commitment to the first ever national minimum wage, but we set up the Low Pay Commission with businesses on the Low Pay Commission to set the minimum wage at the right rate. And we will make sure that all the plans that we bring in will be properly consulted on with business. We will publish in the first 100 days a bill. We will consult on that bill and make sure that we get it right, because we want to make sure that businesses have the flexibility that they need, whilst also ensuring that working people have greater security in work, because too many working people don't have that today.
I think another issue that might affect a lot of people in this room who are parents is your plans for private schools. To impose VAT and get rid of the exemption on business rates for private schools. You're likely to do your first autumn statement after the school year begins in September. Is this a retroactive tax that you're going to impose on public schools? Will it come into the first term after your autumn statement? How is this planning to work?
Well, my focus is making sure that all children can fulfil their potential, and we will put every single penny of that money, £1.5 billion, into our state schools, crucially recruiting 6,500 additional teachers in shortage subjects, because I think we can probably all agree that the children who are struggling most today are children who are in our state schools, in schools that are falling down because of the concrete rat crisis, unqualified teachers teaching subjects like maths, the drying up of provision like music and arts and sports in our state schools. And I believe, and as employers, I think you all know, that young people today are not getting the chances that they need to fulfil their potential and to leave school and college and university with the skills that you need. And we need our state schools to do better. And so we've said that we will end the tax break, whereby at the moment private schools don't pay VAT or business rates. We're not going to have a retrospective tax. I don't think that would be the right thing to do. And I've said we won't do our first budget without an OBR forecast, so that would take us 10 weeks from the date of the general election. And so those changes would be in our first budget, but they would come in after that, not retrospective.
I mean, just on this, some private schools have said that one of the immediate consequences is that they probably cannot afford to give as generous bursaries as they do to low-income students.
Well, you know, like
is
in
that an intended or unintended consequence?
In 1997, when Tony Blair got rid of assisted places, private schools said they wouldn't be able to continue offering bursaries. The number of bursaries have gone up significantly since 1997. I think private schools will always want to attract the very brightest and best children from a whole range of backgrounds. And I would also just say that over the last 14 years, state schools have had to make huge efficiencies because of the cuts to real terms and funding over the last few years. And I strongly believe that private schools as well will be able to make efficiencies. Some private schools have already said they won't pass on the fees, in the increases in VAT, or they certainly won't do it all in one go. And I welcome that.
We are running out of time, so I'm going to get anyone's questions and we'll try and group them together. I see one hand in the corner and one in front of me. I think there are mics coming over. And we have one more if anyone wants to stop being shy. Gentleman in the corner. Sorry, yeah. We'll take them all together.
Hi, Rachel. Great to hear you talk about the importance of the energy sector and the investment. Earlier today, there have been quite a few panels where business people have been asked what do they want from an incoming government, and you hear the words predictability, stability. So how do you balance that with the need to give everything a kick up the backside, change processes, and generate growth?
Thank you. And then one in the corner.
Yeah. Hi, Rachel. On pension tax reform, at the moment the Treasury gives about 60 to 70 billion of subsidies in effect for people to put their money away. But and if we gave that 60 to 70 billion to industry and said, go and build a factory in America with that money, but in effect that's what we're doing in the pension industry at the moment. The money that's been raised, much of it's been invested outside of the UK. Would you make it mandatory that actually some of the capital and the cash that's in pension schemes is actually invested in British growth businesses, many of whom are in this room today.
We have a final one in this corner.
Morning, Rachel. Martin Liu. Jeremy Hunt mentioned that there were 900,000 vacancies in the UK and 6 million people are out of work. It looks good on paper to get those vacancies filled, which we need to for growth from the 6 million. But is that actually realistic? I'm just interested to know how you're going to fill those vacancies, including the 6,500 teachers you mentioned.
Okay, so we have the trade-off between being boring and giving growth a kick up the bum, pensions, and how to get people back into work.
Yeah. So start with Keith's question about how to get things going. Over the last 3 years, the 3 and a bit years that I've been Show Chancellor, I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with people in this room and many other businesses, big and small. And you tell me about the barriers that are discouraging you from investing in Britain. And many of you may have changed your investment profiles, so you're investing less in Britain and more in other countries around the world because they've seen either greater stability in those countries or more support, a greater partnership with business. And my mission is to make Britain the best place in the world to invest or to start and grow a business. And that's why I hope when you read our manifesto or see our priorities, that you see your fingerprints all over them. So the reforms about planning, that's not something that we came up with in our office. That's something that was probably first mentioned to me at the first breakfast, smoked salmon and scrambled egg breakfast that I had 3 and a bit years ago, where that was raised as an issue and then raised countless times since. And you see it in the energy sector more than many others. Reform of the planning system, making it easier to get those grid connections, making it easier to train workers up, linked to Martin's point as well, is absolutely crucial. So I see government's role in removing those things that are stopping businesses from investing. If I say that growth is the #1 mission, well, I'm not going to be able to create wealth and prosperity from the Treasury, but you are going to be able to create that. What is my role is to remove as many of the barriers that is stopping you from investing as I possibly can, and that is what I'm really determined to do. On the question about pensions, I don't want to make it mandatory, but I do want to see more investment. And one way that I think we can do that is by looking at consolidation of pension funds. There are 27,000 DC pension schemes in the UK. The majority of those have fewer than 100 members. I don't believe that those small pension schemes are getting good value for the people who are saving into them. And I think that the FCA and the pensions regulator could be doing more to drive the consolidation of those pension funds to get better returns for savers, and because savers make big sacrifices to save, but also to unlock more long-term patient capital, particularly for start-up businesses. And that's a lot of the work that Jim O'Neill has done for me. And we can start with local government pension schemes as well, where there has not been the consolidation that there could or should have been. That would be my focus. And then working with the British Business Bank and others to create those vehicles to invest in, for pension funds to invest in. That would be my approach rather than a mandatory one. On the question from Martin about how to fill those vacancies, well, we do want to see the employment rate increase. We're one of the few countries that has a lower employment rate than we did before the pandemic. Other countries have managed to get people back into work, and we have struggled in the UK. I think we all know that there are big problems with mental health. The number of the months and years that people were not at school, that were stuck at home, has contributed to that. But we need to support more people back into work. It's why we've said we want to reduce those NHS waiting lists by an additional 2 million a year to help people get back into work. Mental health hubs at secondary schools and in local communities to try and deal with this pandemic of mental health. Reform of the apprenticeship levy to turn it into a growth and skills levy to help businesses to take on people who might not necessarily have the skills right now, but have the aptitude and can be trained up to do those jobs. And so that would be my way of realising those things. But I also want to see more women get back into the workforce. If I become Chancellor in 2 weeks' time, I'll be the first ever female Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I do see a particular responsibility there to ensure that all women who want to work and contribute can. And that means improving our childcare system, and it also means improving our system of social care, because we know that too many women, when they have children, drop out of the workforce or start working part-time. And then similarly, as women get older, it tends to be them that end up looking after their parents or their husband's parents and taking time out of work. I want it to make it easier for families to combine caring responsibilities with their responsibilities in the workplace as well. And so our commitment to free breakfast clubs at primary schools, 3,000 additional nurseries, making use of those primary school classrooms now that the birth rate is declining, to make sure that mums and dads, but it is particularly mums, can take on those extra hours, can take up those opportunities in our economy.
Fantastic. My last job is to say thank you to Rachel. Thank you very much for being here, and I'll hand over back to Hannah and Dom. Thank you.